A poor single mom gave her last $8 to an old man at the pharmacy. But that night, a black car stopped outside her door. The evening air in Central Park had its own rhythm, a rhythm of footsteps fading into silence, of leaves chasing each other across empty paths, of laughter carried from faraway streets where neon lights still glowed. Here, under the old lamps that bathed the benches in a soft golden haze, the city seemed to whisper stories. Stories of strangers passing, of secrets kept, of moments that changed everything. I've sat on this bench long enough to see them unfold. Some stories arrive with the sound of hurried heels, others with the rustle of coats pulled tight against the cold. Tonight, the one I'm about to tell you doesn't begin in wealth or power. It begins in a pharmacy, under fluorescent lights too bright for tired eyes, where a woman held the last of her hope in the shape of 8 crumpled dollars. New York is a place that teaches you the value of $1 quickly. $1 can be the difference between warmth and cold, hunger and survival, dignity and despair. And for Claire, that was her name, those $8 were more than currency. They were bread for tomorrow, milk for her son, a small promise of comfort in a world that rarely gave her any. But promises, as I've learned, often collide with choices. And that night, Claire was about to face one. She wasn't someone you'd notice at first glance, not the kind to stop traffic or draw stares in Times Square. She blended into the endless crowd, another young woman in worn-out jeans, her hair pulled back in a messy knot, her jacket frayed at the cuffs. Yet if you looked closely, you would see the strength in her eyes. The kind of strength that doesn't come from ease but from surviving storms again and again. Her son, just 6 years old, was asleep in their small apartment a few blocks away. His dreams were lighter than hers, untouched by overdue rent notices or the weight of single motherhood. To him, the world was still simple. His mother's hug meant safety, her voice meant peace. And to him, she had promised breakfast in the morning. Bread, milk, nothing fancy, but enough to keep his small smile alive. So there she stood at the counter, the harsh light making every wrinkle of worry on her young face deeper. In front of her, an old man leaned against the counter, his prescription paper trembling in his hand. His voice cracked as he explained he didn't have enough money. The pharmacist, impatient and cold, tapped his pen against the register, ready to send him away. Claire looked down at her fist. $8, the last thread holding tomorrow together. And in that moment, time slowed. She saw the old man's eyes, weary, tired, filled with a kind of helplessness she knew all too well. She felt the tug of war inside, her son's empty stomach against the stranger's desperate need. Kindness is rarely convenient. It asks for pieces of us we think we cannot spare. And yet, before she could stop herself, she placed the bills on the counter. "Here," she whispered. The old man turned, startled, his eyes glistening as if he had just seen light pierce through years of shadows. "Miss, you don't have to." "I know," Claire said softly, almost ashamed of the simplicity of her words. "But you need it more than I do tonight." The pharmacist shrugged, took the money, and bagged the medicine without gratitude. But the old man, he reached out, his fragile hand brushing hers with a weight of gratitude deeper than words. "I've seen many nights in this city, but I will tell you this. That single gesture, quiet, unannounced, almost invisible, was about to echo louder than Claire could ever imagine. Because sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness ripple far beyond the moment. Sometimes $8 can open a door that even fortune couldn't buy. And as Claire walked back into the freezing night, her pockets empty, but her heart uncertainly full, she had no idea that fate had already set something in motion. Something that would arrive not with thank you notes or applause, but with the quiet hum of a black car engine waiting outside her door. Claire lived in the kind of apartment New York forgets. the kind tucked between tall, faceless buildings where laundry lines hung like tired flags and broken mailboxes bore names long faded. The paint on her front door peeled in small curls, and the hallway light flickered just enough to make every return home feel lonelier. Inside, her space was modest. One bedroom, a tiny living room with a couch that doubled as her bed, and a kitchen where the hum of the old refrigerator competed with the sound of dripping pipes. Her son Daniel was 6. He carried the innocence of children who have not yet learned to measure life in bills and debts. To him, their little home was a kingdom. The couch became a ship sailing through imaginary oceans, the cracked window a telescope to watch the stars. And Claire? She was both queen and soldier in that kingdom, the one who kept the monsters away even when she herself trembled in the dark. Every morning she rose before the city stirred. She tiptoed across creaky floors, careful not to wake Daniel, and packed him lunches that were more love than food. A sandwich of bread with just butter became a feast when she folded it neatly and wrote a small note. "Have a good day, my sunshine." He kept those notes tucked in his backpack as if they were treasures. Work was relentless. Claire cleaned offices downtown, scrubbing glass walls that reached higher than she could ever dream. By the time she returned home, her hands smelled of bleach, and her back carried hours of bending and lifting. Yet when Daniel ran to her, arms wide and laughter loud, she felt strength surge again. For him, she could do it all over tomorrow. But beneath the smile she painted for him, there were cracks. Rent notices slipped under the door like threats, utility bills piled up, red letters screaming louder with each month. And still, she shielded Daniel from the truth. She wanted his childhood to be full of superheroes, not overdue balances. At night, when he was asleep, she let the mask fall. She sat on the couch, knees pulled to her chest, and stared at the ceiling that leaked whenever it rained. That was when doubts crept in. Am I enough? Can I give him more than this? Her reflection in the window often answered with silence, her tired eyes staring back like a stranger she barely recognized. Claire had once dreamed differently. Before Daniel, before the weight of raising him alone, she had wanted to study, maybe become a nurse. She loved the idea of helping people, of making a difference. But life had other plans. The father of her child had vanished before Daniel's first birthday, leaving nothing but unpaid promises and an empty space where partnership should have been. She never spoke ill of him to Daniel. She believed children shouldn't carry the failures of their parents. Instead, she told her boy that his father had loved him in his own way, but life sometimes pulled people apart. It was her way of protecting his heart, even as hers carried the truth alone. Despite it all, Claire found small joys. Saturday mornings at the park when Daniel's laughter drowned out her worries. The smell of coffee filling their tiny kitchen on the rare days she could afford it. The sight of him sleeping peacefully, his little hand resting on her arm as if to anchor himself in her presence. But survival in New York never waited for joy. The city demanded its due: rent, food, bus fares, medicines when sickness came knocking. And on that particular night, all she had left between herself and despair were those $8. 8 fragile dollars that stood like a wall between hunger and hope. She had promised Daniel bread and milk for the morning, a simple breakfast, but in their world it meant normalcy, stability, love wrapped in routine. Breaking that promise would feel like breaking his trust, and that thought pierced her more deeply than any hunger could. Still, as she watched the old man at the pharmacy struggle with empty pockets, Claire realized she recognized his expression. It was the same one she wore when she looked at overdue bills, the face of someone who had nothing left to give, yet still needed more. And maybe that was why in that moment she chose him over herself. Because sometimes, when you've carried suffering, you cannot bear to see it mirrored in another. Claire didn't know that choice would echo louder than any she had made before. The bell above the pharmacy door chimed as Claire stepped inside, clutching her small wallet as if it were the last barrier between her and the world's demands. The place smelled of antiseptic and shelves stacked with brightly colored boxes promising relief she couldn't afford. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their white glow exposing every line of fatigue etched into her face. She didn't come here for herself. She had come with the plan to stretch those last $8 into milk, bread, and maybe, if she was lucky, something sweet for Daniel. But when she entered, she immediately noticed him, the old man standing at the counter. His shoulders slumped forward as though the weight of years had bent him permanently. His hands trembled as he slid a prescription across the counter. The pharmacist, a young man with sharp glasses and sharper impatience, scanned the slip and spoke flatly. "That'll be $47. The old man blinked, fumbling in his worn-out coat pocket. Coins clinked softly, scattered and desperate. He laid them on the counter one by one, his voice shaking. I only have 23. Can I pay the rest later, please? It's my heart medication. I can't." The pharmacist sighed, already pushing the coins back toward him. "I'm sorry, sir. Company policy. No full payment, no medicine." His tone carried the detached rhythm of someone who had repeated that phrase too many times to care. Claire's chest tightened. She recognized the panic in the old man's eyes. That blend of fear and humiliation when the world reminds you just how powerless you are. He turned his face slightly, and she caught the hollow sadness there. Her hand instinctively went to her wallet. She knew exactly what was inside. A single $5 bill, 3 ones, and nothing more. Just enough for tomorrow's breakfast. Just enough to keep a promise. Her heart pounded. If I give this, what about Daniel? He'll wake up and there will be nothing. Can I break his trust for a stranger? The silence between the old man and the pharmacist stretched painfully. Other customers shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting away. No one wanted to step in. No one wanted to feel the burden of his need. People in New York were experts at looking without seeing. But Claire, she couldn't look away. Her mind raced through memories. The nights Daniel had gone to bed early, his stomach growling quietly under the covers. The way his small voice had asked once, "Mom, will tomorrow be better?" And how she had smiled and said yes, even though she didn't know. Now, another child's parent, someone else's father, stood here asking for mercy. And all she had was $8. Her breath caught as she opened her wallet. The paper bills felt fragile in her hand, as if they knew the decision she was about to make. She stared at them, her throat dry. If I give this away, what do I tell my son? But another voice whispered, if you don't, what kind of person do you become? Her fingers trembled, but she stepped forward. Here, she said softly, her voice almost lost under the buzz of the lights. She placed the $8 on the counter beside the old man's scattered coins. The pharmacist looked up, annoyed. Ma'am, this isn't enough either. Claire met his eyes, a quiet strength in her gaze. It is now. Together it's enough. The pharmacist hesitated, calculating, then shrugged. He swept the bills and coins into the register and bagged the medicine. Fine, he muttered, but don't expect this again. The old man turned to her, stunned. His lips quivered as tears welled in the corners of his eyes. For a moment he seemed too overwhelmed to speak. Then, in a trembling voice, he whispered, Why would you? You don't even know me. Claire shook her head gently. Because you remind me of someone who matters, and because you need this more than I need bread tonight. His hand reached for hers, cold, thin, yet full of gratitude. He squeezed lightly, and in that simple touch, Claire felt a current pass between them. It wasn't charity, it was recognition. One soul telling another, I see you. The pharmacist slid the bag across the counter. The old man picked it up carefully, as if it were treasure, and with one last look of aching gratitude, shuffled slowly toward the door. Claire watched him leave, her heart torn between quiet warmth and crushing fear. She could still feel the weight of Daniel's trust pressing against her chest. The door closed behind the old man, and for Claire it felt like a chapter ending. She turned back to the counter, her wallet now empty. Tomorrow would come, as it always did. But she wondered, for the first time in a long time, if kindness could truly return when you gave it away. She didn't know it yet, but her question was already answered. Outside, somewhere in the city, the sound of an engine had begun to echo. The old man's steps were slow as he left the counter, the small white pharmacy bag dangling from his fragile fingers. To anyone else, it was just medicine. To him, it was life. Hours, days, perhaps weeks more to keep his weary heart beating. His shoulders, bent with age and defeat when he first stepped in, now lifted slightly, as though the weight had lessened. Claire stood frozen, her empty wallet heavy in her pocket as though it mocked her. She had made her choice. The $8 were gone. Bread and milk for Daniel had vanished with the faint crinkle of bills sliding across the counter. What remained was the warmth of having helped, colliding with the icy fear of tomorrow's emptiness. The door chimed as it closed behind the old man. Outside, snowflakes drifted lazily in the glow of the street lamps. He paused just beyond the glass, clutching the medicine bag against his chest as though protecting something far more precious than pills. Then, almost unconsciously, he turned back to look at Claire through the window. Their eyes met across the glass barrier. His lips curved into a trembling smile, one filled with both gratitude and disbelief. It was the kind of smile that said, "You've changed something in me." Claire lifted her hand slightly, a small, almost hesitant wave. She wanted to reassure him, but in truth, she was reassuring herself. The old man nodded, touched his fingers to his forehead in a gesture of respect, and then shuffled into the night, disappearing into the swirl of snow and city lights. For a moment, the pharmacy felt unbearably quiet. Other customers avoided her gaze, some embarrassed, others perhaps secretly admiring, but no one spoke. The pharmacist cleared his throat and turned away, already moving on to the next transaction. For him, it was just business. For Claire, it was survival slipping through her fingers. She stepped outside into the cold. The wind bit against her cheeks, turning them raw, but she barely noticed. The silence of the street pressed heavily around her, broken only by the hum of distant traffic. She hugged her jacket tighter, pulling the fabric close as though it could shield her from the ache inside. Her mind replayed the moment over and over, the trembling of the old man's hands, the relief in his eyes, the weight of her own sacrifice. Doubt gnawed at her thoughts like a relentless hunger. What have I done? What will Daniel eat tomorrow? How do I explain to a child that kindness doesn't fill his stomach? But alongside the fear, there was something else. A flicker, a fragile flame of warmth that whispered, "You did the right thing." She remembered Daniel's words on another hard night, when he had watched her stare at the fridge with nothing inside. "Mom," he had said with a wisdom too old for 6 years, "you always make things better. Even when we don't have much, you make it enough." That memory steadied her. Perhaps bread was gone, but maybe the example she had set tonight would feed her son in another way. Not his stomach, but his heart. She wanted him to grow up knowing that humanity was worth more than money. Her boots crunched against the icy sidewalk as she began the walk home. The streets were restless, alive with voices, yet she felt invisible. Neon signs buzzed above diners and corner stores, but none of them invited her in. Every light seemed to remind her of what she couldn't afford. Still, she walked on, her arms wrapped around herself, the echo of her decision trailing her like a shadow. She reached the corner and paused. Across the street, she saw the old man again, just for a fleeting moment. He was seated on a bench near the bus stop, the small bag of medicine clutched tightly in his lap. His head was bowed, lips moving faintly as though in prayer. Then the bus arrived, blocking her view. When it pulled away, he was gone. Claire exhaled, a long, shaky breath. Something in her chest loosened, even as the fear of tomorrow pressed tighter. She turned toward home, unaware that her path had just intertwined with destinies far greater than her own. That night she had given away her last $8. To the world it was nothing. To one man it was everything. And soon she would discover. To fate, it was the key that would unlock doors she never even knew existed. The streets of New York stretched endlessly before her. A labyrinth of flickering streetlights, shuttered storefronts, and the occasional sound of sirens echoing in the distance. Claire pulled her jacket tighter against her body, though the fabric was too thin to shield her from the winter wind that cut like knives through the gaps in the buildings. Her breath came out in small clouds, rising and dissolving quickly into the night air, as fleeting as her sense of security. Her boots tapped against the cracked pavement, a rhythm steady but heavy, each step weighed down by the thought of the empty fridge waiting at home. She passed a diner, the glow of neon red and yellow lights bathing the sidewalk. Inside, people laughed over plates of pancakes and steaming mugs of coffee. The sound carried faintly through the glass, almost mocking her hunger. She slowed her pace for a moment, catching a glimpse of a waitress setting down a plate of eggs and toast in front of a customer. The smell of butter and coffee slipped through the cracks of the door when it opened, hitting her like a wave. She turned away quickly. To linger was to ache. As she walked, her thoughts spun like the snowflakes falling lazily from the dark sky. She saw Daniel's face in her mind, his round cheeks, his hair curling in messy tufts after a night of sleep, the way he clutched his small stuffed bear under one arm. She had promised him bread and milk for tomorrow morning. She had promised breakfast. And promises, to a child, weren't just words. They were anchors. They were safety. How do I explain to him that kindness took the place of breakfast? She thought bitterly, blinking against tears that stung her eyes. Her steps carried her past a bookstore, its window fogged with warmth from inside. Books lined the shelves in neat rows, stories waiting to be opened. She remembered how, years ago, before life had hardened, she used to dream of working in a place like that, surrounded by words, by stories that promised escape and hope. She would have studied, maybe even written her own one day, but those dreams had been folded away like clothes in a drawer she no longer opened. Survival left little space for dreaming. Her path took her near the park, the playground still standing under the dim glow of a single lamppost. She stopped for a moment, her breath catching as she remembered Daniel's laughter echoing through this very place. His small hands gripping the chains of the swing, his voice shouting, "Higher, Mom! Push me higher!" The memory warmed her, but it also hurt. Childhood should be filled with carefree moments like that, not with empty cupboards and the sound of bills being slipped under the door. Claire pressed on, her footsteps crunching over frozen patches of snow. She tried to steady her breathing, to push away the rising panic. But the images kept returning. Daniel waking up, rubbing his sleepy eyes, running to the kitchen only to find no bread, no milk. She imagined the disappointment in his face, the way he might ask, "But you promised, Mom." The thought cut deeper than any hunger she felt. Her mind wandered back further to her own childhood. She remembered standing in a small kitchen with her mother, who often faced the same choices she now faced. Her mother had always managed to put something on the table, even if it was just a thin soup made from scraps. "It's not about how much we have," her mother used to say. "It's about the love we serve it with." Those words had stayed with Claire. They were what gave her the strength to smile through struggle, to make a single sandwich feel like a feast for Daniel. Tonight, though, the weight of her sacrifice pressed harder than usual. She tried to convince herself that Daniel would understand, that one day he would look back and know his mother gave everything she could. But children don't think in one days. They live in the immediacy of now. And now, he needed her to keep a promise she no longer had the means to fulfill. As she neared her apartment building, Claire slowed her steps. The cracked bricks loomed ahead, the stairwell light flickering faintly. She paused at the door, closing her eyes for a brief moment. She inhaled deeply, letting the cold air fill her lungs. She told herself, "You did the right thing. Maybe kindness has its own way of returning." Still, The gnawing voice of doubt whispered louder. Kindness doesn't pay rent. Kindness doesn't feed your boy. She pushed open the heavy door and stepped into the dim hallway. The familiar creak of the stairs greeted her as she climbed to her floor, each step echoing with the question she couldn't shake. What will tomorrow bring? She didn't know the answer. But she knew this. Somewhere out there, a man carried his medicine tonight because of her. And perhaps in a city that often swallowed kindness whole, that had to mean something. The apartment door creaked softly as Claire pushed it open, careful not to wake Daniel. The hallway light flickered once before dying completely, plunging the corridor into shadow. She slipped inside and closed the door behind her with a quiet sigh, leaning against it for just a moment. The silence pressed down around her like a heavy blanket, thick with the weight of unspoken fears. Her eyes fell first on the couch. Daniel was there, curled beneath his thin blanket, his stuffed bear tucked tightly against his chest. His lips parted slightly as he breathed in the deep rhythm of sleep, the kind untouched by worry. Children had a way of surrendering to rest completely, trusting that the world would be the same when they woke. Claire envied that. She slipped off her jacket and draped it over the back of the chair before moving toward the small kitchen. The linoleum floor was cold beneath her feet, cracked in places from years of wear. The refrigerator hummed as she opened it, the pale light spilling over shelves nearly bare. Half a jar of peanut butter sat lonely on the middle rack, beside a carton of milk that held only a swallow at the bottom. A single egg rested in the corner of the carton, its shell chipped. That was all. Claire closed the door slowly, the hum of the fridge suddenly too loud in the silence. She turned to the small cabinet above the sink, pulling it open with the faint hope that maybe she had missed something. Inside, there was little more than a box of tea bags, a few packets of sugar, and crumbs left behind from crackers long gone. She shut it with a soft click, her throat tightening. She leaned against the counter, pressing her palms flat against the surface as if grounding herself. Her stomach growled quietly, a reminder of her own hunger, but she ignored it. Hunger was nothing new. She had endured it countless nights before. What tore at her now wasn't her own empty belly. It was the thought of Daniel waking up, rubbing his sleepy eyes, asking for breakfast, and finding nothing. The promise replayed in her mind like a cruel echo. "I'll bring milk and bread tomorrow." She had said it with a smile, brushing his hair back from his forehead as he nodded trustingly. To him, her word was unshakable. To break it was to break the safe world she had built around him. Claire moved back into the living room and sank into the worn-out chair near the couch. She watched him sleep, the rise and fall of his small chest, the way his tiny fingers clutched the bear as though it were life itself. A tear slipped down her cheek uninvited. She brushed it away quickly, as if even the act of crying might disturb him. Her mind wandered to the man from the pharmacy. The way his eyes had shone with gratitude, the way his frail hand had pressed hers. In that moment it had felt right. It had felt necessary. But now, staring at her son, the sacrifice cut differently. Did I give away Daniel's breakfast for another man's survival? Did I trade his comfort for a stranger's tomorrow? The questions clawed at her, cruel and relentless. Yet another thought surfaced. What if someday Daniel faced a world as harsh as hers and no one stepped forward for him? Wouldn't she want someone, anyone, to see him and choose kindness? The thought both comforted and haunted her. The night stretched on. Claire lay down on the edge of the couch beside Daniel, careful not to wake him. She wrapped an arm around his small body, drawing him close. His warmth seeped into her, his breathing steady and sure. She closed her eyes, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the faint drip of the bathroom faucet, the far-off sounds of the city beyond the cracked window. Sleep, however, refused to come. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but worse was the ache of guilt pressing against her ribs. She stared into the darkness, her thoughts circling endlessly. Maybe tomorrow something will change. Maybe kindness does return somehow. She wanted to believe it. She needed to believe it. And so, with her boy tucked against her, Claire whispered a silent prayer into the stillness, not for herself but for him. For his laughter to remain untouched, for his innocence to outlast her struggles, for tomorrow to bring more than what tonight had taken away. Outside, the wind rattled the window pane. The city moved on, indifferent. But fate had already shifted its course. And though Claire could not see it yet, destiny had set its wheels in motion, rolling quietly toward her little apartment in the form of polished black paint and humming engines. Night in the city is not the absence of sound, it is a catalog of whispers. Pipes speak in tired rattles. Elevators cough like old men. Faraway sirens stretch and thin as if the street itself were pulling them. In Claire's apartment, silence gathered in corners like dust, settling on the edges of picture frames, the chipped paint of the window, the frayed hems of the curtains that never quite met in the middle. She lay there beside Daniel, his small breath warm on her forearm, and watched the ceiling take the shape of every fear she had tried not to name. Sleep did not come. It stood across the room and regarded her politely, the way wealth looks at hunger, as if it knew it could leave whenever it wanted. The couch springs murmured every time she shifted. She counted heartbeats, then counted the seconds between nearby traffic lights, then counted the cracks in the plaster above her. Anything to distract from the ache inside. But the ache was patient. It sat with her, a companion that kept no promises and never left early. When you cannot sleep, your past visits. It doesn't knock. It drifts in like a draft, pushes your hair back, sits at the foot of your bed with its suitcase of memories. Claire saw herself at 19, standing at a bus stop with a backpack and a plan. She remembered the way the city had first seemed like a dare. Bright, impossible, full of doors that only needed knocking. She had wanted to study, to wear a white coat and learn the geometry of veins and healing. She had wanted to be the kind of person who ran toward emergencies instead of turning away. There had been a receptionist job then, a night class, a stack of note cards with words that promised futures. And there had been him. Dark hair, easy laugh, a smile that said he understood her hunger for more. For a while, they ate coffee for dinner and called it romance. With him, the city felt warmer, its edges cuffed back with laughter. She remembered running in the rain together, shoes squeaking, the two of them pushing a stuck subway turnstile and collapsing into giggles like thieves who had stolen time. He said, "You are the bravest person I know." She wore that sentence like a scarf. Then life unfolded the way paper does when it's been folded too many times. The creases show. There was a blue plus sign on a test strip. There was the way he looked at the floor when she said she wanted to keep the baby. The way he said we less often and I more often, as if pronouns had rent to pay too. There were promises, oh so many, and then fewer, and then none. She remembered the last message. I just need time. Time, it turned out, is a door that swings only one way. He walked through. If bitterness were a fruit, it would have ripened in her then. But bitterness feeds you nothing. It is a flavor that spoils every other taste. So Claire learned a new recipe for living. Hold steady, cut expenses smaller than breath, stretch hope until it thins but does not break. When Daniel arrived, angry, pink, astonishing, she learned another recipe. Turn fear into fuel. Every bottle washed at 3 a.m. was a vow. Every hour mopped from night to morning was a star she taped to the ceiling so he would have a sky. On the couch now, she shifted and listened to her son's soft exhale. She thought of the pharmacy again, the brightness, the coins, the old man's eyes. She thought of the $8 leaving her hand with the same sensation as watching a balloon rise and knowing it will never come back. But she also thought of the way he had looked at her, not as a savior, not as a fool, but as if she were proof that the world had not ended yet. Still, the drawer of doubt slid open. Rent was due in 9 days. Shoes were wearing thin. Daniel's jacket zipper was stubborn again. and she had promised she would fix it Saturday. In the cabinet, 2 tea bags waited like polite guests who did not know the party was over. The milk was a line at the bottom of the carton. She could measure her life in lines like that. The pencil marks on the doorframe where Daniel's height had climbed inch by inch. The lines etched at the corners of her mouth that had not been there 5 years ago. The line where her courage met its limits and then stepped 1 inch farther because there was no other option. The faucet in the bathroom tapped out a tired rhythm, drip, think, that matched the way her mind moved from memory to plan to fear and back. She closed her eyes and tried to count blessings like rosary beads. Daniel's health. The neighbor who once watched him for an hour when the subway broke down. The worn library card whose plastic had cracked. Proof she still believed in borrowing different lives for a while. She moved her thumb along the invisible string of these blessings and felt it catch on the rough knot of tonight. A promise made to a child. A promise kept to a stranger. "Mom?" The whisper was so soft she almost imagined it. Daniel stirred, eyes blinking, pupils big and glossy in the dark. His voice came shallow with sleep. "Are we okay?" 100 answers rushed to her mouth. The truest one was a long story about numbers and sacrifices and the way love sometimes looks like absence on a plate. But mothers learn a dialect of reassurance. It is not lying, it is architecture. You build a bridge over the chasm until they can cross on their own. "We're okay," she said, and kissed his hair, which smelled faintly of shampoo and crayons. "Sleep, my sunshine." He nodded and fell back into the warm well of dreams. Just like that, the trust unaffected by inflation, not pegged to any market, abundant. Claire watched him. It is a holy thing, she thought, to be believed in. It is also a heavy thing. The radiator clicked and rattled. She slid from the couch and stood by the window, tugging the curtain aside with 2 fingers. Outside, the alley crouched between buildings like a secret. Someone's television blue flickered in a far window. A taxi washed through the street, yellow hull shining, then vanished. Snow threatened without committing, a few flakes drifting like second thoughts. She pressed her forehead to the glass. It was cold enough to make her eyes water. On the sill, the paint had peeled in comma-shaped curls, as if the building had been trying to write its own sentence and lost interest. If the city were a person, she thought, it would be the kind who hands you a map without directions and says, "Figure it out." But tonight, a different thought edged in. Sometimes the city sends messengers, not angels. She did not believe in storybook rescues, but moments. A door that opens at the right time. A stranger who chooses to see you. A chance that looks like trouble until it knocks. Her jaw ached. She had been clenching it. She flexed her fingers, felt the phantom weight of the bills she no longer had, and let her hands fall to her sides. In the mirror above the sink, her face looked older than she remembered, and kinder than she allowed. Tired, yes, but not finished. There was a kind of beauty to it, the beauty of a bridge that holds after the storm, of a book repaired with tape that still tells the truth. She returned to the couch and tucked herself around Daniel again, shaping herself to his small back like a shield. She did not pray exactly, but she did make a bargain with whatever listened. "Take whatever you want from me, but give this boy mornings without fear." She promised the ceiling she would find a way. She always did, no matter how thin the way had to be sliced. Outside, a low sound began, faint as a memory at first, then gathering, a motor idling somewhere down the block. Claire didn't notice it yet. She was busy counting breaths, counting the stitches in the fabric of courage. The city held its own breath with her, and the night leaned closer as if the walls themselves wanted to hear what would happen next. When morning refused to come quickly enough, she closed her eyes and pictured the park in spring, green insisting itself through dirt, geese walking like careful old men along the pond, someone reading on a bench as if time were abundant. She pictured herself there with Daniel, orange juice sweating in paper cups, a bag with 2 bagels and a cream cheese that did not have to be rationed. She taught herself in the dark how to imagine the ordinary as a luxury and then believe it was still possible. The engine outside deepened almost imperceptibly. a purr turning into a presence. Claire shifted, not awake enough to worry, not asleep enough to rest. Her last thought before the clock slid stubbornly toward 2 a.m. was small but sturdy. What I gave away tonight was not gone. It changed shape. She did not know yet what shape it had taken. She did not know that sometimes kindness comes back wearing polished shoes and knocking with knuckles that do not ask. They invite. The night had settled into its usual rhythm. Pipes knocking in the walls, a radiator hissing in complaint, footsteps of a neighbor fading down the stairwell. Claire had almost begun to believe that the city outside had forgotten her small apartment, that perhaps she could close her eyes and let exhaustion claim her. But then it came. At first, it was only a hum. Low, steady, patient. A sound that didn't belong on her block, where cars usually sputtered and coughed like old men clearing their throats. This was different. Smooth, controlled. The kind of purr that spoke of engineering too fine to age quickly. It crept into the silence, wrapping itself around the corners of the building until she could feel it in her chest more than hear it in her ears. Claire stirred on the couch, instinct sharper than rest. Daniel murmured in his sleep, clutching his bear tighter but did not wake. She sat up, heart quickening as her body registered what her mind had not yet named. A presence outside, something that lingered instead of passing by. She crossed the cold floor carefully, her toes curling against the chill, and moved toward the window. The curtain was thin, almost translucent from years of use, and when she pulled it back just an inch, the world outside revealed itself in a slice of darkness pierced by a single shape. A car, black, long. Its surface gleamed beneath the tired streetlight, reflecting it like a mirror bent by shadows. The windows were tinted so deeply that they absorbed the glow, refusing to give back any hint of who sat inside. The headlights were off, yet the machine seemed alive, its idle engine thrumming like a heartbeat too strong to be ignored. Claire's breath fogged the glass as she leaned closer. With her sleeve, she wiped a small circle clear, her pulse quickening. On the driver's side, a silhouette sat motionless, hands resting on the wheel with the stillness of a statue. In the back, another figure. Still. Waiting. Watching. She stepped back instinctively, her body pressing flat against the peeling wallpaper, as if distance could erase the feeling of being seen. Fear swelled in her chest. Not the kind that makes you scream, but the kind that locks your jaw and demands silence. Why here? Why now? This was not a neighborhood visited by sleek sedans in the dead of night. This was a place people drove through quickly, doors locked, windows up. Yet the car did not drive through. It had chosen her street. It had chosen to stop. Claire's mind raced through possibilities. Police, no lights, debt collectors, too polished. Wrong address? The last thought clung to her like hope, but even hope felt thin when the engine refused to leave. She turned back toward the couch. Daniel shifted slightly, his lashes resting like shadows on his cheeks, his small chest rising and falling in rhythm. He was untouched by the sound, unaware of the tension that now filled the room. She brushed a hand across his hair, grounding herself in his innocence. Whatever the car was, she would stand between it and him. That was her vow. Back at the window, she dared another glance. The driver moved. Not much, just the tilt of a head, a hand adjusting something on the dashboard. Then stillness again. The figure in the back leaned forward for a moment, and in the faint spill of streetlight, Claire thought she saw the outline of a face. Strong, older, eyes fixed directly on her window. She gasped softly and let the curtain fall shut, her heart pounding. Her apartment felt smaller now, as if the walls had drawn inward, pressing her toward a decision she didn't know how to make. Should she call someone? Who? She had no one. The neighbors were strangers who nodded in stairwells but disappeared into their own burdens. The police? What would she say? A car is parked outside my building. In New York, that was barely worth a shrug. But this wasn't just any car. It was waiting. She paced to the door and back again, her bare feet whispering across the floor. Every sound in the building magnified, the creak of pipes, a spoon clattering in an upstairs kitchen, the faint shuffle of shoes in the hallway. Each noise collided with the constant hum outside, a reminder that the car was still there, patient as the night itself. Her thoughts circled back to the old man, to the pharmacy, to the trembling hands clutching the bag of medicine she had made possible. Could it be him? Could gratitude take this shape? An expensive machine idling in the dark? The idea seemed absurd. Gratitude came as thank you notes or awkward smiles, not as black cars and shadows in the night. Still, something deep in her bones whispered, "This is connected." She returned to the couch, sinking onto the edge, unable to rest. The motor's vibration threaded through the walls, through her skin. She pressed a hand against her chest, as if to still her own racing pulse. For a long while, she simply sat there, watching Daniel breathe, listening to the car breathe too, until it felt like the two rhythms were competing. At last, she rose again, moved to the window, and pulled the curtain back with trembling fingers. The car had not moved. The driver's silhouette remained, solid and steady. In the back, the shadow shifted, and for just a second, only a second, the interior light flicked on. It was enough. She saw a man. Older, with lines carved into his face, eyes sharp even in the fleeting glow. He was watching her apartment, watching her. Then the light vanished, swallowed by darkness again. Claire stumbled back, the air leaving her lungs. This was no accident. Whoever they were, they had come here deliberately. And though the door downstairs remained closed, and no knock had sounded yet, she felt it, an inevitability pressing closer. The car outside was not simply waiting, it was preparing. And in that knowledge, Claire's world shifted once more. Silence has a way of thickening just before something happens, like the air holding its breath. Claire stood between the window and the couch, feeling it gather around her, this dense, invisible curtain waiting to be pulled aside. The car's low purr threaded through the walls, through the floorboards, through her bones, a needle stitching the outside world to the inside of her small life. She glanced at Daniel. He'd rolled onto his back, mouth parted, the bear tipped sideways like a tiny guard who had dozed off on duty. She smoothed his hair with 2 fingers and whispered, "I'm right here," the oath mothers give whether or not danger can hear them. Then she moved to the door. There are thresholds in life that look like wood and metal, but feel like decisions. This one had cheap paint and a peephole with a scratched ring, and it felt like destiny pressed into hardware. Her phone said 1:59 a.m. and 8% battery. She considered calling someone. No one. Considered recording a voice memo, a message in a bottle the sea of the future might read. Instead, she slipped the phone into her back pocket, adjusted the chain on the latch, and stood with her ear against the door. The hallway smelled faintly of old bleach and somebody's dinner, onions gone soft in a pan hours earlier. The stairwell exhaled a draft up under the door, a cool ribbon around her ankles. The first sound was not a knock. It was a shoe landing softly on the runner out front, a weight that knew exactly how much to give and hold back at once. A man used to expensive floors, she thought. Someone who had learned to walk in quiet rooms. Another step, then a pause. In the pause, Claire's heartbeat misbehaved, running and stumbling at once. The car below idled on like a patient animal. Then came the knock. Not loud, not timid. 3 knuckles on her door, a measured rhythm, like a sentence with its period already chosen. She closed her eyes. She had expected something more aggression, more pleading, more noise. But sometimes certainty is the softest sound. It doesn't have to push to get in. Her hand found the deadbolt and held it without turning. She summoned all the questions she could carry to the surface of her voice and said, "Who is it?" No answer. Not immediately. She heard the faintest exchange of breath beyond the wood, a presence calibrating itself to her fear. She repeated steadier, "Who is it?" A voice, muffled by the door, shaped by restraint, answered, "We'd like to speak with you. It's important." We. The word sat cold on her tongue. She pictured the driver, the shadow in the back seat. She pictured men who sold solutions like seasons. They came, they left, they promised it would be warm again. She pictured the old man from the pharmacy, but the image slid away, fragile as tissue paper. The old man would have knocked differently, she told herself. He would have begged forgiveness for waking her, apologized to the wood for being so forward with it. This knock was not an apology. It was a proposition. "What do you want?" she asked. In the corner of her eye, the cheap clock on the wall rolled over to 2 a.m. The minute hand looked like a knife. "Just a few minutes," the voice said. "We don't mean you any harm." People who mean harm never say it, and people who don't sometimes have to, she thought. She considered the chain, the peephole, the distance from the couch to the door. 5 steps if she ran, 7 if she remembered to breathe first. She checked Daniel again, still asleep, a kingdom of it, and then leaned into the peephole. The glass was bubbled slightly at the edges, turning the hallway into a fisheye universe. A man came into view, distorted but clear enough. Dark coat, an expensive cut that even a cheap lens couldn't cheapen, a face drawn in lines of purpose rather than cruelty. Behind him, slightly to the left, another shape. The older silhouette, shorter, thinner, the hunch of years on the shoulders. Her breath went shallow. The old man from the pharmacy? The thought sparked, and with it came a flare of something like warmth and dread braided together. She stepped back. If it's him, why here? If it's not, why me? She pressed her palm flat to the door as if she could read the truth by temperature. "It's late," she said through the wood. "I have a child asleep." "We know," the first voice answered, and the fact of that knowledge made the hallway tilt for a second. "We won't take long." The words came with a gravity that made promises sound like parameters. She could pretend not to be home. She could wait them out. But the car had been waiting for longer than most men wait for anything that isn't money. Waiting was its own kind of message. And she had learned long ago that hiding is a bridge that collapses under repetition. She slid the chain to the end of its rail but did not remove it. The deadbolt turned with a small, traitorous click that sounded like it could be heard down the block. She opened the door 2 inches. Cold hall air slid inside, brisk and official. The man in the coat took half a step back, a courtesy that read as training. In the space between the door and the frame, their eyes met. His were alert, unflinching, the way people look when they have come to deliver something they do not intend to take back. "Miss Claire?" he asked. The way he said her name made it realer than usual, as if he'd paid for the consonants. She did not answer. She watched his hands instead, the way a person watches a dog they don't know, palms empty, fingers still. "I need to see your identification," she said, surprising herself. A small, fierce satisfaction moved in her chest, the insistence on process, on her right to ask. The man inclined his head slightly, reached into his inside pocket slowly, as if he were followed by the instruction manual of how not to alarm a mother, and produced a slim leather wallet. He held it up to the crack and she studied what she could. A card, a company crest she recognized vaguely from somewhere high above street level. News tickers, headlines on screens in bank lobbies. The last name leaped out at her. Whitmore. The older silhouette stepped closer into the wedge of light. Claire caught the glint of the man's eyes first, wet, earnest, with the tremor of gratitude or illness, or both, behind them. Her breath faltered. The pharmacy swung back into the room, the counter, the coins, the bag in a fragile hand. The old man blinked, then bowed his head the smallest possible distance, the way people do when thank you has to fit between breaths. Claire closed the door the 2 inches she'd opened, not to shut them out, but to contain her own rush of feeling. She touched her forehead to the wood, a childlike gesture she hadn't used in years, and counted backward from 5. When she opened the crack again, the man in the coat hadn't moved. He waited like people wait when they have learned that being first through a door is not always a privilege. "We came to thank you," the older voice said, softer than the hallway deserved. "And to make something right." The syllables were careful, set down like glass on a table. Make something right. She almost laughed, because life does not use phrases like that at 2 in the morning unless it intends to rearrange furniture in your soul. Instead, she said, "You can't be here." Not as law, but as wish. Not as rule, but as dream. "We can be gone as soon as we've said what we need to say," the man in the coat replied. "Or we can come back at a better hour. But I would appreciate 2 minutes now." The "I would appreciate" was not condescension. It was a man used to being obeyed who had decided for this doorway to practice requesting. From the couch, a rustle. Daniel turned, sighed, found the groove of sleep again. Claire's body made the decision her mind was pretending to still debate. She slid the chain free, kept the door held by the edge of her palm, and widened the opening to the size of caution. The hallway breathed onto her skin. The man in the coat did not advance. The older man lifted the pharmacy bag. No, not that bag, another one, and held it near his chest as if to reassure her he came with hands already full. "I don't let strangers in," she said, voice steady and small at once. "You shouldn't," the man in the coat answered. "Let us stand here then." He accepted the border she drew, and something unclenched a fraction in her spine. Down on the street, the engine finally paused, a long-held note released. Somewhere a light shifted. The building exhaled. Claire looked from one man to the other. The past hour gathered into a beat of decision on a thin wire. She could feel the weight of the moment, how it would hang in the closet of memory. Something you reach out to touch years later to remind yourself of the fabric of your life. 2 minutes, she said, and quietly, "My son is sleeping." Quietly, the man repeated, and his voice arranged itself around the promise. He opened his mouth to speak, and just before the words crossed the threshold, the old man's hand lifted as if he needed to borrow the beginning. The story, poised between night and morning, moved to the hinge. This story continues in the next episode. If you were touched by this first part, don't miss what happens next.